Okay, Boker Tov, Shavua Tov, everybody. A pleasure to see everybody. As we get started, I understand last week I had to listen to online, but was an introduction. And this week we get to number 7. So the biblical number 7, a series of 7s, and pleasure to welcome Rabbi Leibtag. And we look forward to a wonderful week of learning and many wonderful shirim. So, Vakasha, Rabbi, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you. So 2 things. Last week we introduced Shemitah. And today we're going to go back to the title of 7 because there's a double title, there's Shemitah and there's number 7. Of course, they're related. So last week I was in we did it from the airport. So I didn't have everything. I didn't have my home setting. So I took a simple topic. But today we're going to go back to really is the main topic, how the number 7 begins. Let me just check the chat real fast to make sure our connection is good. Okay, Boker Tov. There we go. Let me share my source sheet and we'll get started. Here we go. So, Shemitah biblical meaning of 7 and today's class number 2. And the title today is number 7 in Sefer Bereshit, which is going to get everything started. So last week we began our introduction, also Shemitah, and this week, and we discussed the rhythms of nature, the 365-day year, the seasons, and the 24-hour day, which is basically day and night. It's a rhythm that repeats itself, day, night. And then seasons, spring, fall, winter, and spring, summer, fall, and winter. That's it. So those are things that controls our life. And then each of those has a cycle of 7. There's a 7-day week and a 7-year Shemitah cycle. We talked about how they're connected and the logic behind it. But to appreciate why Chumash picks the number 7 for all those, we need the story of creation. So we're going to go back to Bereshit, understand the deeper meaning of 7. And why almost every single time we have anything that has to do with nature relates to number 7. Just before we begin Perek Aleph, where do we have it in Bereshit? We have the number 7 in creation, of course. The flood story, I'm not sure if you remember from 2 weeks ago, there's 7 days before the 40 days. In the beginning of chapter 7, Ki lamim od shiva anochi mamtir. And for some reason, there needs to be 7 days before 4 days and 40 nights. And we have the same thing later at Har Sinai. That'll be one of our topics in later shiurim. How the number 7 relates to Har Sinai as well. And then the 7 days of Miluim, etc. Brit Milah relates to 7, even though it's on the 8th day. It's the 8th day is the first day after 7. So we have to dedicate a share to why there's a Brit on the 8th day, because 8 also relates to 7. Interesting that Avram got into this because when he makes a treaty with Avimelech, he sets aside 7 kvasim. Of course, he could pick any number, but for some reason, there's 7 lambs in his treaty with Avimelech. Even more interesting, with Yaakov and Lavan, the number 7 comes up all through the story. I'm going to work for 7 years for Rachel, and then 7 years for Leah, and then there's a 7-day week, and he seems there's no concept of a week before the story of the man, as we'll see. But for some reason, there seems to be a week celebration of the wedding. Remember? This is Malei Shvuazot. We have to dedicate, not a shir, but a couple of minutes and 1 shir later, why that number 7 is so central to the story of Yaakov and Lavan. And finally, Pharaoh's dream, which clearly is about agriculture, in case you didn't catch on. The whole thing. Also, it's 7 years of famine, 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. So that's going to be the number 7 as well. So those are all the links. Those are all the mentions of 7 in Bereshit, and it's going to develop even more in Shemot, like over and over again in Shemot. But again, I want to begin today with somebody who want to dedicate the story of creation. Now, what I want to begin with, let's open the first, let me share the screen. Actually, before we do the screen, stop the share for a second. I want to talk about something which seems to be what the Kuzari is saying, but something very in general. Everyone knows there's 2 names for God in the Torah. There's Shem Elokim. Shem Elokim is one name for God. It's like a common noun. And Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei, it's called Shem Havaya, which is God's personal name. Chumash purposely uses the 2 names, 2 different stories of creation, 2 different these aspects of that story of creation. But in the very first story, God's name is Elokim. And there's a famous question is, have a name for God, but the name for God that we use is plural, meaning God's name is many gods. So we're into this idea of monotheism, that there's only one God. For some reason, in the very first line of Chumash, we talk about God, this one God, and his name is many gods. Now, if I understood Rabbi Yehuda Levi correctly in the Kuzari, he's saying that's the whole point of God's name, is that what appears to be many powers is really one power. Because ancient man viewed many powers of nature. Remember, everyone knows there's a sun god and a moon god, and a rain god and a fertility god, and war gods and wind gods and things like that. Therefore, Chumash uses one name Elohim to describe many gods, but then conjugates it in the singular by almost making a mistake in Hebrew. That's by basically making a mistake in Hebrew, saying many gods and conjugating in a singular. That's how Chumash teaches monotheism in its very opening line. So we'll get back to that theme later on. What I want to do now is try to understand what's going on in the story of creation. I'm going to have a little file here and show you as follows here. Share my screen. And, we were sharing our screen here. So we have the number 7. Now we have to go to Breshit. Here we go. So look at this file. And what I want to show you, I'll make it a little bit smaller to start with. I have here the 7 days of creation, or 6 days of creation, depending on what you consider a day of creation. It's day 1, this little box is day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, and day 6. Each day gets a little bit longer.
Rabbi, you want to make it slightly bigger? I imagine people.
I'm going to make it big. I'm making it smaller now just to show it that I have 7 days here. Now I'm going to make it bigger. I'm going to make it bigger. Here we go. To read the psukim themselves. Here's what I want to point out now. There's a certain format to the story, which is key in understanding how it's going to work. How does every day begin? There's a parshiah. If you look in a regular Tanakh, each day is a parshiah. So day 2 begins with Vayomer Elokim. Day 3 begins with Vayomer Elokim. Day 4 begins with Vayomer Elokim. Day 5, day 6. In other words, the phrase Vayomer Elokim comes up quite often. And every day of creation, even day 1, if I take the first 2 psukim as introductory, then day 1 also, every day begins with Vayomer Elokim something, and every day ends, which we all familiar with Vayer, Vayiboker, Yom Blank. So it just, as far as format goes, there's a very basic format to every day of creation. What's that format? The format is, it begins with Vayomer Elokim, God said something, and every day ends with a very similar phrase, Vayer Vayivoker Yom Echad. But there's way more to the format than just that opening line and closing line. And now, why is that format important? As we're going to claim over and over again, that Chumash is a book to study, not just read. Therefore, the message of Chumash that I derive is not only from reading the text, it's from studying the text. And we're going to see in a minute, I'm sure most of you are familiar with this, there are numerous parallels between the different days of creation. So I want to point out, based on the format, this parallel that the days are setting up, and then we have to try to understand what's the meaning of the parallel. So let's begin just with what follows every Vayomer Elokim. In each day of creation, it doesn't only begin with God saying something. God's going to say a command, and every command is going to be followed by an execution. I just want to point it out, make sure it's clear. Vayomer Elokim, command, Yehi Or, execution by Yehi Or. That's the simplest form. That's like the simplest form possible. Let there be light, and there was light. The next day, what's God say? Yehi rakia b'toch hamayim v'imavdil b'mayim l'mayim. Now, that's the command. What's the execution? It doesn't just say by Yehi rakia. Remember by Yehi Or? Now it gets a little more complex. Vayas Elokim et harakia. God says it, and He does it. God makes the rakia. And he vayavdel ben hamayim asher mitachat l'rakia ben hamayim asher me'al l'rakia vayichen. So we have the command, the execution, and it happens. Now, we'll go back to other similarities, but simply I want to point out every day begins with a command and execution. Day 3, command, yikavu hamayim mitachat hashemayim, let the waters recede and let the dry land come up. And here it's just vayichen, and it happens. That's an easy. So no, sometimes it says it just happened. Sometimes we get the detail of how it happens. Day 4, God says, Yehi morot b'rkiah shamayim. Let there be the big lights, the luminaries in the sky, to separate between day and night. and they'll be for Otot and Moadim. What those mean, we'll talk about later on. And then God continues and says, here we have, it's interesting. God says, let there be these luminaries, and it was, and then explains how it came about. He puts the moon, the sun in charge of the day, the moon in charge of the night, and he puts them again in the heavens to give light on the land. And also we have the word limshol, we'll talk about again. We'll get all the add-ons later on. The main thing is command execution. Day 5, Yishutzu Amayim Sheres Nefesh Chaya, he commands the water to make living things, and for the birds to fly, go in the sky. And then here when God does it, it's very interesting. We have the verb Vayivra. But usually it's Vayas, now we have Vayivra. God creates these big sea creatures, whatever they are, these taninim, and all every living things in the water, and then all the birds. So basically there's a commandment and execution. And finally on day 6, in a very similar manner, God says, first he commanded the water, Yishutzu Amayim. Now he commands the land, but Totzi haaretz nefesh chaya, let the land bring out living things, and all the animals, and again by Yichen, and then how God did it, chayat haaretz the mina, again command execution. So that should be crystal clear. That's nice and simple. I want to make sure everyone understood it. Every single day begins with command execution. Almost every day follows with an evaluation. God says there's an execution, there's a command execution followed by an evaluation on day 1. This should have been highlighted. Bayar Elohim was to say it was good. Yeah, but it's highlighted. It's like Bayar Elohim et Orki Tov. Let's change our color here. How do I change my color? Okay, just yellow is good enough. God sees it's good. Here also, where does God say? Day 2 is missing. That's interesting. For some reason, there's no evaluation on day 2. On day 3, God sees that it's good after the command and execution. On day 4, God sees that it's good. Ve'elim kitov. I have it here in italics. And on day 5, God sees that it's good. And on day 6, what happens? I'm sorry, right here. Bayar Elohim kitov, he makes the animals and God sees that it's good. Already? So again, every single day, command execution, evaluation, except for day 2, which is only command execution without an evaluation. Every day ending Bayar Vayboker. That's clearly a pattern. Now, in addition to that, there's always an add-on. On the first 3 days, God is giving out names. That should be crystal clear. On day 1, he names the or, day, yom, and the night, laila. So he gives names to day and night. Day 2, he's going to call the water above, call them shamayim. Remember, he makes the rakia that divides between the water above and the water below. And the water there, sham, there above, is mayim. So the mayim sham, or the sham mayim, becomes called shamayim. Later, the water below will be called yamim. On day 3, he calls the yabasha, he calls it aretz, and the water that remains down below, he calls yamim. And that's it for God giving names. Notice on days 1, 2, and 3, God gives names. Afterwards, he stops giving names. Later, if you remember in Gan Eden, man starts giving out names. Another thing that's going to develop later on, first God gives names to the things, the big things he created. Then he makes man. Man gives names to all the living things. And ultimately, man's going to make a name for God, but that'll take a while in Sefer Bereshit, and it'll be a theme to the rest of Chumash. This idea of names is going to be a mega theme in Chumash. Again, it's just starting here in creation. Now, so again, what's unique to days 1, 2, and 3 are going to be God giving names. On days 4, 5, and 6, God's giving out jobs. You know what? He makes the luminaries, the sun and the moon and the stars, but the sun is in charge of the day. What's it say here? God made the 2 morot agdolim, the big luminaries, Notice he doesn't call them sun and moon. He just calls them Ma'or Agadol and Ma'or Katan. You don't want to mention names of, because calling the sun Shemesh is actually a name of a god. The same thing with the Yareach. So the Ma'or Agadol was Memshelet Hayom. It's in charge of the day. And the Ma'or Katan, the moon, is in charge of the night. So everyone has that, each thing he makes has a job. On day 5, he adds a blessing. He doesn't give a name, but after making all these living things, he blesses them and tells them Pru Urvu. That'll be something new. He has them, it's a blessing of being fruitful and multiply. And we have a very similar blessing later when God makes man. We'll see. We'll get to man in a minute. But in a nutshell, every day of creation has something special. The first 3 days, names, and the last 3 days, jobs and blessings. Now, that was the boring part. Now we'll get to the interesting part. If I match up, and this again, I'm hoping this should be obvious. I'll start with a question, which I ask. Which is, let me stop the share for a second. And 1 second, had a new share. We went stop share and just check the chat real fast. Okay, we'll get to the Rambam. Actually, I'll get to the questions later on. Now, on the parallels, here's what I want to point out. On day 4, God makes the Ma'orot, right? And he puts the moon, the sun in charge of the day. Now, this question sounds like it's a joke, but I'll explain what I mean by the joke. The question I ask my students all the time is, why did God put the sun in charge of the day when it's light out? It would be better to give us the sun at night when it's dark. We don't need the sun during the day because there's daylight. Why put the sun in charge of the day? So everyone asks the question, what do you mean? They learned in physics class that what? That we have sun, we have light because of the sun. But I say, no, that's not true. Because there's already day and night and day 1. So don't tell me we have day and night because of the sun. There's day and night before there's the sun and moon. That's the joke I asked to get them thinking. Meaning, it simply proves to you that you can't take the story of creation literally. As Ibn Ezra points out, whenever I have a story in Chumash where the literal meaning of the story doesn't make any sense, where the story contradicts itself, that allows me, almost forces me not to take it literally, but to take it seriously. Meaning, Chumash is not giving me a play-by-play description of what happened, of how God did it, but rather it's describing creation. It's called etiology, where I have day and night, and I have stars, I have nature. I'm making up a story to explain the meaning of the present reality. I think the fancy word in English is etiology, E-T-I-O-L-O-G-Y, something like that. It's when you make up a story, every culture has them, there's a certain reality, and then I have a story that explains it. You have that in Chumash a lot, like, that's why we don't eat Gidan Hashem. So we have a story about Yaakov that explains why Am Yisrael has the custom of not eating Gidan Hashem, and things like that. But that's a simple example. The best example, again, is creation. We have nature. Chumash gives us a story to understand, not to tell us how God did it, but to give meaning to why God did it. More so, I want to show you, is to explain why we keep Shabbat, or the meaning of Shabbat. If I want to make it cute, it's not, we don't keep Shabbat because God created in 7 days. God created in 7 days, so we keep Shabbat. Shabbat's going to be key. We're going to talk about that a lot. Shabbat's going to be that, remember that external cycle that we're putting on top of the natural cycle. We're taking natural cycle and imposing upon it a religious cycle of 7 days. Not just putting us in control of time, it's taking, instead of being controlled by time, we'll be controlled by God, or we'll put God into nature. Now, why am I asking that question? Why did God put the sun on day 4? Simply to point out that day 1 and day 4 are parallel to each other. In what way? Just look at the words. It's a giveaway. What's it say? Make this a little bit bigger. What happens on day 1? God makes on day 1 Hi'or, Hi'or. Here we have Ma'orot, the same word. A Ma'or, put the mem in front of the word or, and you have the word, the luminaries. There's no doubt that day 1 and day 4 are connected. Let me make a little, where's my toolbar? My toolbar is, where's my toolbar? I lost my toolbar, 1 second. Try again. Share screen. Okay, here's my toolbar. Annotate. And now I need a here we are. I need a arrow. Here we go. That's it. That's what I wanted. So I have Ba'orot and Or. So you can see how they're related. Day 1 relates to day 4. Now that could be just coincidental, but then when we look later on, you'll see that day 2 relates to day 5. In what way? There's the rakia that divides between the water above and water below. And what do you have on day 5? We have Of Yafeth, Barakia Shamayim. It's just like we had a division between the water above and water below, and that made the sea below and the sky above. What do we have on day 5? God makes animals, but what? But the animals are in the sea. And Of Yafeth. So there's no land animals on day 5 because there's no land on day 2. On day 2, we simply have the Shamayim and the Yamim. We have the sky and the seas. And therefore, we populate them on day 5 with living things in the water and in the sky. And then we talk about how God makes them. Now, if day 1 parallel to day 2 and to 4 and 2 is to 5, then obviously 3 will be to 6. And that's really easy to see because, let me move this down. It's not going to work now. We're going to have to clear the drawing and back to my mouse and move it down a little bit. What do we have on day 3? Let's get this up a little, make this smaller. There we go. What do we have on day 3? Let's go back and see what we have on day 3. On day 3, clear all the drawings there. On day 3, what does God say? We have the Abasha, and the Abasha turns into the land. And what do we have on day 6? On day 6, actually start down here below, Totzi Haaretz actually was right here. Let me do where's my annotation? Annotate and a line. So we have on day 3, we get the Haaretz and we have Totzi Haaretz. God makes land and then we have land animals. So that should be crystal clear. I want to make sure, again, I'm assuming everyone knows everything I just showed you. But I have to make sure that's crystal clear to do the big jump we're going to do now. There's no doubt that Chumash wants the reader on his own to recognize that day 1 is parallel to 4, 2 to 5, and 3 to 6, because that's not by chance. It's a perfect parallel all the way through. Chumash doesn't say in the beginning, pay attention to the parallel, but it's clear that Chumash is setting up a parallel that it wants the reader to discover. And again, I'm making a big deal about it because it's, in my opinion, that proves that Chumash is a book to study and not read. Now, once Chumash is setting up that pattern, the question is going to be, what's the purpose of that parallel? That Chumash doesn't spill the beans. It doesn't tell you the answer. That's what we have to figure out, and that's what the Parshanim usually talk about. Now, let's take a look at, let's just make sure we're recording. Okay, we're on. Now, there's one major exception to everything I just told you. Because what do we see? Every day has an act of creation, correct? Command, execution, evaluation. When it comes to day 3, something totally new happens. What happens on day 3? On day 3, we have 2 distinct acts of creation. And then we're going to find on day 6, we're going to have 2 distinct acts of creation. I made a big deal about that pattern, command, execution, evaluation, because it happens every day. Day 1, 2, 4, and 5, it happens once. On days 3 and 6, we have 2 acts of creation. Again, command, execution, evaluation. And again, so it shows you that there's an additional parallel between 3 and 6, but there must be a reason why days 3 and 6 have 2 acts of creation, as opposed to the other days only have 1. So let's see what's happening on day 3. And the 2 acts of creation on day 3 must relate to the 2 acts of creation on day 6. So let's take a quick look and see what happens. Let's go back to day 3. It goes as follows. What's the first act of creation on day 3? I can make this bigger so we can read inside. Okay, what happens on day 3? God makes land, and God calls the land Aretz, and then the water by default becomes Yamim, and God evaluates and it's good. I'm going to call this now 3b. 3 with the 2 stars, that'd be 3b. What does God say now? An additional additional command. Vayomer Elokim, same format. Another command, followed by the execution. Okay, got it? There's 2 Vayomer Elokims on this day and 2 evaluations. Let's highlight this evaluation. Got it? And we'll notice that they are totally parallel. Vayar Elohim Kitov, Vayar Elohim Kitov, all on the same day. Okay, and 2 Vayomer Elokims. So there's 2 acts of creation. Now, what's the connection between them? 3a is land, 3b is vegetation. Now, of course, they're connected because without land, you can't have vegetation. But on the other hand, why is there a need for 2 separate acts of creation? Why can't God do it all in one? So for some reason, we're having 2 acts of creation on day 3. We'll see the parallel in a minute in day 6. What happens on day 6? Let's take a look here on the side. Let's undo my drawings and look at day 6. Mouse and small. Okay. What happens on day 6? We have as follows. On day 6, the first thing that God makes, Vayomer Elokim, Totzias Nefesh Chaya, he makes the land animals, and he evaluates them. On top here. God sees that they're good. That's 6a. 6b, God makes man. Vayomer Elokim, Naseh Adam B'Tzameinu Kidmutenu. We'll read the psukim more in detail. Because 6a is land animals, 6b are what we call humans. You get command, execution, evaluation on 6a and on 3a and 3b. Is an evaluation on 6b we'll talk about soon. But everything is building up now that 6b is the last thing that God does. And on 6b he makes man. Now let's talk about the parallel now. Let me stop this share and go to the other, so it was the same form. Here we go. Go back to the regular source sheet. So here we go. What do we have? Day 1 Or, day 4 sun, moon, and stars, Ma'orot. Day 2 Rakia, day 5 fish in the sea and fowl in the heavens. Day 3a and 3b land and vegetation or plants, and day 3 land animals and men. Now, when you look at the parallel, what do you see? Between 3a and 3b, between these 2, they're related, but I call it a quantum leap. Because what's changing? In 3b, we begin life. And what's unique to life is there's life and there's death. But every living thing, before it dies, it can reproduce itself. Therefore, what do we have? We're going from what's called from domain to tzomeach in Hebrew, from, I guess, inanimate objects, things that just their matter. And then we move to life forms. Every life forms, they live, but they die. But before they die, they can reproduce themselves. Therefore, it's Esev Mazriya Zera, Eitzprio Sepri. God made shrubbery, but it gives seeds so it can make more before it dies. So even though 3 and 3b are related, there's what I call a quantum leap between 3a and 3b. There's a big leap between land and land animals. Between land and vegetation. On day 6, we also have from 6a to 6b, but it's not as obvious a quantum leap as we had on 3a to 3b. Why? Because on day 6, God first makes land animals, and then he makes man. The difference between man and animal didn't seem to be as big as the difference between land and fruits. Because here I'm moving from domain to tzomeach, from land animals to life forms. Here I'm just having 2 different life forms, one may be a bit advanced. What I want to claim is that parallel is one of the key points of creation, that what does God want us to realize? That even though 6a and 6b seem to be similar, Chumash is highlighting that there's a qualitative difference between man and animal. Because when you look at nature, especially when you take science classes or like natural history and things like that, what are humans? Humans are just another mammal. similar to other land animals, we might be a little more advanced. So we're maybe a little faster in the evolution, but we're basically super duper apes with more abilities. What Chumash wants to do, which again, this is now my interpretation. Again, the parallel is clear. I want to suggest an interpretation or a subjective interpretation on the meaning. Chumash wants to highlight and wants man to realize that he's different than animal, because I think that's where religion begins. Religion begins when man realizes there's a big difference between man and animal, even though it's not so obvious when you first look at it. You can argue what that difference is, but whatever the difference is, that's going to be man's Tzelem Elokim. Now we're going to read now the day 6b. We're going to read God making man to point out and try to see what's so special about man. So let's return now to the Breshit Perek Aleph. We're going to go to 6b. We're going to make it a lot bigger so we can read it. And we're going to notice a couple of things. Okay, let's see how God makes man now. Vayomer Elokim. Look at everything that's so peculiar about God making man. Vayomer Elokim. Naseh Adam b'tsamenu kidbotenu. Number one, the plural. Some people call it the royal we. But what's going on here? Why is God saying the plural? In fact, the only time that we're using plural for the name Elokim. So Rashi points out that God's talking to his board members, to his the Beit Din Shamala, the celestial bodies above, and he's consulting them before making man, so there shouldn't be jealousy. But there's no doubt that if every single other act of creation, God talks in the singular, he doesn't consult anyone before creating. Before making man, he seems to be consulting with his previous creations. He says, again, it's not clear who's God talking to, but God's consulting with someone, with somebody, before making man. But the use of the word naseh in the introduction is already saying something special about man. And bitsamenu kidmutenu, right? Similar to God. What's this idea of tzelem Elokim? We'll talk about it very soon. Now, just like on day 4, God put the sun and the moon in charge of everything above in the sky, God's putting man in charge of everything down below. Why? By Yirdu bidgat hayam u'vov hashamayim, man will be in charge, or put dominion over the sea animals and the land and the birds and the land animals, and basically everything under the sun. There's everything that God made on day 4. Everything God made on day 5 and 6 and 6a, which is every living thing, man is in charge of, just like the sun and the moon are in charge of everything up in the sky on day 1 and day 4, on day 1, 2, and 4. Now, so that's the command. At the execution, again, we have the verb bara. By vra Elokim at Adam b'tzamo. A separate verb bria exists for man. Something unique. We had bara also when they began the sea animals in day 5. We had God made the taninim. Now we have vayivra. God makes man b'tzamo. And again, b'tzelem Elokim baraoto. Zachar nekiva baraotam. So using the word bara over and over again here, it's quite obvious. God's making man in his image. Now, what does it mean that man is in God's image? We'll talk about soon. But Elokim has been doing all these acts of creation. The very last act of creation is Elokim making man b'tzelem Elokim. And what I want to claim is that if Elokim has been creating new things every day, and this is the last thing he creates, the last thing that God creates is a living thing that can be creative like God. We'll bring an example of this very shortly. Then God blesses men, like he blessed the other living things with pru'urvu, and fill the land. But part of the blessing, which I think is part of man's nature now, is, let's clear the drawings and go back to the mouse. Okay. He's in charge of, again, like I said before, you're in charge of all living things down here on earth. Now, in addition to that, and this is going to highlight the parallel between 3b and 6b, between the second act of when God makes vegetation, God makes, remember, so what's God saying now? In Pasuk Chavtet, I have another Vayomer Elokim, which is no longer a command, but rather, I guess, a statement. about man's diet. This is not Vayomer Elokim followed by command and execution, but rather Vayomer Elokim talking about man's diet. It says what? God seems to be talking to men, saying, I'm giving you to eat all vegetation and all fruit trees. So what's your diet? You can have what basically Bori Pri Eitz and Bori Pri Adama. If I want to understand why we differentiate in blessings between Bori Pri Eitz and Bori Pri Adama, a Jew, before he makes a blessing, you make a blessing for eating food, but we differentiate between if it's a vegetable or if it's a fruit. And there's a special bracha for vegetables, something growing from the ground, Bori Pri Adama, but if it's a fruit, we say Bori Pri Ha'etz. So that distinction, which is clear when we make bracha, we make blessings, begins here in God's command to man, what he gets to eat. What's even more interesting is that God says, what do animals get to eat? What do the animals get to eat? Every living thing other than man gets to eat only vegetation. It's called Yerek Esev. Now remember that phrase Yerek Esev, because after the flood, when man gets permission after the flood to eat meat, God says, I'm giving you meat to eat like Yerek Esev. Is that good or bad? A great discussion. So, and then what? Now we have an evaluation. Bayar looking at kol asher asat, evaluation on everything God made, and therefore only when God makes man, man doesn't have a separate tov by man because man can be good or bad, as we'll see in Gan Eden. But everything that God made, the whole system together, is tov ba'od, and then bayar by boker yom shishi. Now, let me just check real fast the chat. Okay, and okay, on the wait a second, let me check what was that question about Pru or Vu. I'll check the chat again. Again, I'll get to the chat at the end of the share. So what do we have? What I want to claim is because like Chulul Shemaim after day 6, there's no more creation. Notice that day 7 doesn't fit the pattern. It doesn't end by Yivar Boker Yom Shvi or Yom HaShabbat. It doesn't begin with Vayomer Elokim. It's now Shemaim Ba'aretz are finished, and God finishes the creation from all of his work on the 7th day. So are there 6 days of creation in Shabbat, or is Shabbat included in creation? It's a technical question that everyone can decide on their own. But there's definitely 6 days stand alone from the 7th day. On the 6 days, God's making something that didn't exist before. On the 7th day, he rests from everything creative and stops. Why is that important? Because when God makes man, he makes man in his image. And now we're going to go to our other source sheet and make our key statement. What's our claim? We're going to take this equation, and which pretty much the Rambam sort of seems to be saying this in Morin Nevuchim. And I want to quote a Maral that says something very similar, but let me explain the definition. What's Tzelem Elokim? If I want to understand what's Tzelem Elokim, it's whatever the difference is between man and animal. If I take that parallel between 6a and 6b compared to 3a and 3b, if what's special about man is the Tzelem Elokim, because nothing else got created, it's described that way. Elohim's been making new things. He's been creative every single day. And that difference between man and animal, whatever man is, it's animal does not have Tzelem Elokim, man does. So the Rambam explains that what defines Tzelem Elokim, it's the very first chapter in Morin Nevuchim, what defines Tzelem Elokim, whatever that difference is between man and animal, that's Tzelem Elokim. Now the Maral has a beautiful definition of this idea. I'll just read the Maral and translate. Maral in Tiferet Yisrael, the first parak. Man is totally different than everything else that God created. He doesn't have a soul like an animal. There's something special. We call it, this is neshama. Okay. It's like it has a nefesh that has more wisdom. Not like the other animals. Not like the other animals in nature. And listen carefully. What can man do? I want to use this to explain what I mean by creativity. Man can do, he's a builder. He can be a carpenter. He can do malacha. He can be industrious, invent new things. He can bake. he can cook, he can bake, he can cook, he can basically process food. And similar things, okay? It makes clothing, things like that, okay? So these are all things that relate to his creative ability. Let me explain the way I understand the Maharal and the Rambam. Let me stop the share for a minute. What I want to explain is as follows: that let's say you ask somebody, I'll start from scratch. If you ask somebody, write a 3-page composition of how man is different than animal. Name me difference between man and animal. Most people could do that. At the same time, if you ask them to write a 3-page composition on man is similar than animal, you can do that as well. There are numerous similarities between man and animal, numerous differences. Can you define it? It's impossible, almost impossible to define. I don't think anyone's ever given an exact scientific definition on man is different than animal. There's a lot of similarities, there's a lot of differences, but it's clear that they're different. It's hard to define exactly what the difference is. Some people say the ability to believe that there's no God, maybe. That's my joke. Man's soul, what's the difference is every animal realizes there must be a creator, and only man can think there's no God. But man has this ability that he's different than animal. Again, it's clear he's different. How to define the difference is difficult. What Rambam seems to be saying, Maimonides, is that whatever that difference is, that's Tzelem Elokim. Now, instead of defining the difference, I want to highlight key differences. That's going to explain a lot of things about life. Okay. Again, now I'll just answer Marty's question real fast. I'm going to ask a question about how can God command nature. Again, our approach to Chumash is as follows. I'll try to explain this approach. When we read Chumash, we study what's written, not what happened. Hope I don't get in trouble for this, but it's called, in Hebrew, it's called Lomdi Masha Katuv Lo Masha Kara. What happened? That's God's problem. When you study Chumash, you're reading what's written, because the message that God's giving us, the Torah, God gave us the Torah, the message is through the written word, and you study the Torah to understand the meaning of life. God doesn't have to give me a history book to tell me how he did it. We believe there's a God, and God gave us the Torah. When God tells us a story, okay, it's to derive from it meaning, to understand the meaning of our lives, to understand why we're chosen, to understand what's the meaning of life, what's our connection to God. What actually happened, in my opinion, is irrelevant. Now, I don't want to get into the topic of historicity. What really happened, what didn't happen, you can argue that from today to tomorrow. But if something didn't happen, that doesn't mean the Torah is not from God. It means you have to take the story seriously, that story carries an important message. So almost, it's very easy, very, very accepted that the first 11 chapters can be taken allegorically, because they're a build-up to understand why Am Yisrael, why God chooses the people. So when you study Sefer Bereshit in detail, because the first 11 chapters are universal, and they're all stories that don't seem to fit with nature very well, and a lot of them contradict, there's internal contradictions in them, and there's numerous parallels in other literature. It could be that Chumash is using those stories as a tool, and we'll see later as a platform, to explain his theology. Now, what I want to suggest is that once I understand that Chumash is making a big deal about men's Tzelem Elokim, and because Elokim every day has been creating new things, and when it's over, we have nature as it is, and there's no more new creations, the last thing God makes is a living thing that can be creative. So if you want to be cute, civilization is over. Creation is over and civilization begins. God did his job, and now he gives it over to man. Man's in charge. Now, that's a big responsibility that man needs to be creative. God wants man to be creative, and now we're going to get to our topic that we talked about last week. What are we doing on Shabbat? We're supposed to work 6 days a week. Means we're supposed to be creative 6 days a week. God made us creative, but that creativity, remember, every day has an evaluation of good and bad. God wants us to evaluate our actions and make sure what we create is good, but we have the ability also to do evil. Just read the next chapter. Then we have Eisadat Tov Ra. With the ability to be creative comes the ability to do good and to do bad. So what God does is good. What man does could be good, it could be evil. Now, what do I do to make sure that whatever I do is good? So I need to work 6 days a week. I need to take a break on the seventh day to stop all creativity, to evaluate what I've done and what I'm going to be doing. To make sure that what we do is good, I need to take that break, not just to say thank you for my creativity. We have to evaluate our creativity because we're in God's image. But we have to make sure that what we do with our creativity are good things. Now, if I take a look quickly at all the things that we do, I'm saying that humans do, they're different than animal. I'll give you examples of things. Again, we can have a longer discussion, but I'll give you classic examples. Number one, clothing. Right? Every other living thing doesn't have clothing, doesn't make clothing. And only humans, now we make clothing, we make a business out of it. But clothing, if someone came from a different planet and observed humans compared to animals, clothing is a key difference. We're the only animal that shed its fur in evolution, almost for no reason. Why do we shed our fur and make clothes? And every other animal doesn't need clothing. They survive fine without it. We need clothing. Now, that's number one. When it comes to clothing is a big difference. Number two, when it comes to our diet, animals eat other animals, animals eat fruit, animals eat vegetation. What do? We eat other animals, but unlike any other animal, before eating them, we cook them. There's animals of prey eat other animals. It happens all the time. They eat them, watch National Geographic, and they eat them, and that's it. They don't take the dead carcass of the animal, make fire, because animals don't make fire either. Only humans make fire, and cook them and then eat them. Just eat it as it is. When it comes to vegetation, no other animal is going to plant grain and plant seeds, wait for them to grow, harvest the grain months later, take those little seeds, instead of eating them as they are, grinding them down into powder, making flour, adding water, putting them in an oven and making bread. It's like ridiculous, isn't it? We got hooked on wheat. We sort of domesticated wheat. But what we do with wheat, we go sugar, don't we? We go crazy with wheat. The whole process of making bread is unique to being human. It might be stupidity, but there's no doubt in human culture, bread is a staple. And in fact, in anthropology, pretty much domestication of wheat is the beginning of civilization. Was it 10,000 years ago or 20,000 years ago? But pretty much biblical history begins with the domestication of wheat or civilization and domestication of animals. There's lots of wild animals, but turning animals into a business means taking animals, sheep and cattle, and raising them to simply to shech them and eat them, or take their, again, we need sheep to make clothing because we need their wool. So we have to grow sheep so we can, what's called, shave, what do you call it? That's this, what's it called? Sharing, sharing the wool.
Shear.
Yeah, to share that. And then making clothing out of that. The whole process of clothing. It's like crazy, isn't it? But we grow them and then we eat them and then we drink their milk. We make a business out of it, and then we sell all the babies, etc. That's called, we domesticated animals, sheep and cattle. And those are the two ancient professions for males in the Bible, right? Cain and Hevel, one's a farmer and one is a cowboy, not a cowboy, a shepherd.
Shepherd.
Yeah. Shepherds and farmers. And that those are the two main professions we have. Now, that's unique again to humans. The whole idea of industry, making houses, it's making bricks, like taking fire and making building materials. Remember, we just covered all the stories in the first 11 chapters, didn't we? Migdal Bavel, the first industrial revolution, making cities, make with bricks and mortar. Animals don't build cities. Again, ants can make an ant farm, but they make the same ant farm every year. It's in their DNA. They don't write books. Humans take their thoughts. Animals communicate. Humans also communicate, but animals also talk to each other. But humans take their thoughts, write them down on paper, and can transmit their thoughts to the next generation or to other people through writing. As far as we know, animals don't do that. We've never seen them writing things. They might make marks instead, but the idea of creative writing, they can even write Lashon Hara if they want. But humans have this ability to transmit their thoughts through writing. And they use fire for construction and things like that. That those are all things that any outside observer would notice how humans are different than animals. Now, is that a minor difference or is that a major difference? I'm just saying it's not a definition of Tzelem Elokim. It's an indicator that man is different than animal. Now, why did I give those examples? Because those examples are basically all the things that we don't do on Shabbat. You with me? Hope you realize that. It's like as simple as could be. And I'm going to work backwards now and prove my point from the laws of Shabbat. Because if you remember the laws of Shabbat, there's 39 malachot, last count. If I look at the 39 malachot, there's a whole process of making bread called siddur the pot. I think there's 11 there, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yeah. There's 11 malachot of the whole process of making bread, from planting the seeds to plowing the field to reaping the field to to winnowing, and till you get those, till you get the grains and then grinding them, and then making dough, adding water. It's called lash, and then finally cooking the dough. Not to mention making fire later, for the oven. The whole process of making clothing, called bigud. The whole process of making clothing, I think that's 13. From the time you take shearing the sheep and bleaching it, making it white, and then stringing it, and then making the thread, and then the whole process of weaving until you make the clothing. The whole process of making clothing. That's not the whole process of writing. Okay, and the whole process of building an industry. And the last one is that the only malacha which isn't really malacha is is havar, is moving things, right? Carrying, which I call moving inventory, which is basically how to make money. Moving inventory, I think that's what Hutzah is. It's marketplace, moving inventory and selling it and making a business out of it. Those are all things that are unique to humans. What I'm getting at is what we don't do on Shabbat, or almost all the things that the rabbis defined as forbidden on Shabbat, all relate to the difference between man and animal. They're all the things. The definition of work on Shabbat, almost everything we don't do on Shabbat, are all the things that remind us how we're different than animal. So God wants us to do these things. These typify our Tzelem Elokim. So we refrain from them one day a week, so that when I do them on the 7 days of the week, I remember that God made me B'Tzelem Elokim. Now, not just to say thank you again, but to act in a way to evaluate what I'm doing it right. The best example for Shabbat, remember every day of creation, what does God say? God says command, execution, evaluation. I think the rabbis call that Melechet Machshevet. Means to be chayiv on Shabbat, to do something wrong on Shabbat, I have to think about doing it and then do it. It can't happen just by accident or without thought. Only thoughtful work, thoughtful creativity. And again, that's a parallel to what God did on every day of creation. So if Shabbat is there to remind man that he's made B'Tzelem Elokim, then all the things we don't do on Shabbat are Tzelem Elokim. Now, what you all learned is that the things we don't do are the things they did in the Mishkan. But again, we'll have to do this in a separate share, is that all the things that we do in the Mishkan are for the exact same reason. Because everything that we do in the Mishkan all reminds us that God made us B'Tzelem Elokim. I mean, it's the same thing. Because when we go to the temple, when we go visit God in the temple, we're going to remind ourselves of creation. The parallels between the Mishkan and creation, anyone who studied Trumat Tetzav of Yaakov Pekude knows that there's numerous parallels between the creation story and the Mishkan. And there's whole question, is the Mishkan does the Mishkan reflect creation or revelation? There's all the parallels between building the Mishkan and Har Sinai, but there's also numerous parallels between building the Mishkan and creation. You can't miss them when you study them, especially in the not just the 7 days of Miluim, as we'll see, but the whole process of Moshe seeing everything he made. Moshe evaluates everything they did, and everything is good. But what are we doing in the Mishkan? All the kelim are going to remind us of things that how man is different than animal. What do we put on the Mizbeach? Only the domesticated animals, and of course processed food, processed grain, and processed wine. I should have mentioned, no animal in the right mind can take good, juicy grapes, stamp on them, take the water, let the water sit and get ruined, and get thing, and then sell it for $100 a bottle and say it tastes good. Only humans do things like that. No animal is going to make wine and then sell it and make a business out of it. It's so typical, and therefore wine, that what goes on the Mizbeach Nisucha yain, remember, pouring wine, fine, but solet or bread. We show off our bread, then we have lechem apanim. We have a candle light at night, the menorah. We have the written word in the Kodesh Kodashim.
What's your rush?
Kids will be here at 12. I don't want to walk before they come. I want to take, you know what? You listen. I'm going to go for a while.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, I'll get the chat in a minute. Yeah, my time's up already. I better get the chat right now. So again, I jumped ahead, but just for the fun of it, in case I forget next week, look at the things we do to bring Shabbat in. We light candles. It's unique to humans, right? Making light at night. We make kiddush on wine. We make a motzi on bread, right? All the things that remind us of how we're different than animal. Those ideas are so obvious when you look at them. And what I'm trying to show you is that, again, I can't prove this interpretation is correct. I'm just making a big deal about how man, B'Tselem Elokim, is, in my opinion, one of the key points of the creation story. Man needs to remember that God made him with that ability to be creative. What you do with your creativity, okay, that's what God wants you to evaluate and do what's good. And if you don't take a break, what you need to do, we take a break one day every 7 days. Like God describes his own creation in human terms. Like he describes a 7-day work week or a 6-day work week and 1 day to rest. And remember, and he sees everything's tov ma'od at the end. So that's what we need to do. We work 6 days a week and we evaluate, and then we do what's good. Okay, my time's up. I guess I'll develop this better next week. Now, what we're going to see is this number 7 relates to the creation of nature, as God made it. And therefore, every time we're going to have a holiday that relates to nature, anything that relates to nature is going to go to 7. This theme is so basic to not just to Judaism, to humankind, to recognizing that there's a God and there's something special about humans, and humans have responsibility. God blessed them with the ability to be creative, but what we do with that blessing is going to be the challenge of human life. Later, God's going to pick a nation to be his model nation that uses their creativity properly. That's why we have to, again, all these things we have to develop. I just want to show you today that the story of creation with number 7 relates first and foremost to God making nature and God making man with this ability to be creative. And then we're going to have lots of mitzvot that revolve around the number 7, but specifically because of the story of creation, everything that relates to nature and man's creativity is going to relate to 7. We'll find it in the temple, we'll find it in Shabbat, we'll find it in tons of laws. But today, I just wanted to open up this theme of 7 with creation. And my point is that God did not create, we don't keep Shabbat because God created in 7 days. God gave us a creation story. God gave us a creation story, so that we appreciate what it means for what the meaning of our creativity, and to give meaning to Shabbat. God wants us to keep Shabbat, is to make Shabbat meaningful. He gives us a creation story, and then that basically, again, it's not just apologetics. It's not solving the problem of how do you match science with what it says in the Torah. It shows you it's simply not a question. Okay, so let me stop here and look at the questions real fast. Again, we'll go back to this because they did the last 5 minutes way too fast. We'll finish this next week and take it from creation to the rest of Sefer Bereshit and where the number 7 comes up there in the beginning of Shemot. Okay, so let's go back. Okay, let's go back and see what the questions were. Okay, source sheets will be posted in a minute. Okay, the source sheets later. Okay, the royal we. Okay, that's very good. Later we'll do a share if we have time about why what we gain by doing that plural, what the royal we is about, what we learn from it. Okay, doesn't Ramban say somewhere the mitzvot have to be fleshed out somehow so that if 7, one can ask why not 6 or 8, but nothing special about the number until the number is established? To my friends in favor and roses and Ram. Okay, it could be. Again, that's a question on the Rambam. I'm just saying that once God picks 7, in my opinion, if I'm going to find the number 7, this is my whole point. If I'm going to find 7 years of Shemitah and 7 days of Shabbat and 7 lambs when I bring a korban and 7 years of famine and 7 years of good and 7 in so many different mitzvot, 7 days of Tumah and Tara, and we're going to see almost all those things relate to nature. My point is, Chumash is setting in its opening story how when any mitzvah that we have has 7, has to remind us of this theme of not only that got created, but why he gave man the ability to be creative. Well, what's the responsibility of man? How to use his creativity, and man seeing himself as a partner with God in creation. Then I'll try to flesh that out as we continue. Okay, on day 3. Oh, so now, but why does it say 2 times it was good on day 3? So ask almost anybody. Oh, that was a direct message. When someone asked me privately, is why does it say twice it was good on day 3? The answer is simple now. Not just so we can charge more money for a wedding hall on Tuesday because it's a school life to get married, Pamaim Kitov. There's a deeper reason. There's 2 evaluations on the 3rd day because there's 2 acts of creation on the 3rd day. So the reason why it says there's 2 evaluations on day 3 is because there's 2 acts of creation on day 3. Why there's no evaluation on day 2, I'll deal with that in another class. There's something, the fact that that division, lahavdil, there's something missing on day 2, which is the reason why there's no evaluation on that day. Not that there's something good about it, but it needs to be held up. But day 3 has 2 acts of creation, therefore it says twice kitov. Therefore, I'd expect on day 6 2 pamaim kitovs. Instead, what do we have? We have God sees it's good when he makes animals on 6a. And 6b, he doesn't look at man and sees he's good. He sees his whole creation that it's good. Everything he made is Tov mode. Man by itself is not so good, as we'll find out in world history. But he can be good. I think there's something there as well. But this explains beautifully why day 3 has 2 evaluations. Okay, 6a and 6b, the verb is different. What do you mean by the verb is different? The command. Can someone explain what you mean by what Asher asked?
The vayivra for man.
Oh yeah, the verb is different for sure.
He starts out with vayas and then he changes.
Yeah.
But when he does it, he says vayivra.
Yeah, so that's right.
There's only 3 examples of bara.
When God makes Shemayim Ba'aretz is the bara of days 1 through 4.
Yesh me'ayin.
Yeah. If bara is really yesh me'ayin, that's a big machloket. But assuming that something from nothing is bara, then when God makes Shemayim Ba'aretz, the first 4 days is 1 bara. When he makes the animal kingdom with the Taninim, there's another bara.
A different form of life that moves.
Yeah. Like every stage from Tzomech, from Domain, Tzomech, Chai Medaber, there's 4 different stages. So, and when he makes man, again, the verb bara by man is highlighting the difference. Okay, now it's 6ACP is different on purpose. Having bara by man is, again, everything's highlighting the man's different than animal. Even though it's so easy to think that man, when I look at nature, I can easily see man is simply a super duper ape. But we're part of the animal kingdom. And that's the question, are we part of the animal kingdom or are we above it all? Are we something godly? And then this will help us explain what happens in the flood later on. Okay, another anonymous question. How can Adam be fruitful and multiply when he's only human? No. So when God makes man, now I'm sorry, that was a direct message. Someone wrote me, how can God tell Adam to be fruitful and multiply if he's only a male? But when you read carefully, you mix up chapter 2 and chapter 1. Plural in chapter 1, God makes man zachar and nekeva. In chapter 1, God makes Adam is the name of the species, not the name of Adam. Yeah. It's not like Adam and Eve. Adam is the name of the species, not the name of Adam Arishon. And God made man zachar and nekeva bara otam. Now Rashi says Gan Eden is how he made them zachar and nekeva. But again, that has to do with how we read chapter 1 and chapter 2. But Pru'urvu is assuming there's zachar and nekeva. In fact, everything that God makes that's alive from 3b, from vegetation, everything that God makes is highlighting reproduction. Everything reproduces itself. Fish, Pru'urvu. Humans, again, Pru'urvu. The whole animal kingdom. Okay. What does it mean for God to command to nature which has no free will? Okay. So there's a problem about free will. Again, I'm dealing with the text, not so much in philosophy, but how God commands. I'm just saying this is a story that explains that what we call nature is an act of God. Now, Spinoza took this to the nth degree and said, in essence, what is nature? Like the sum total of nature is God, and our understanding is exactly the opposite. That God is kadosh, God's separate from his creation, and he made it. But that's a topic more in philosophy. So again, why God uses human terms to describe his actions? What's the fancy word again? Anthropomorphism. In order to relate to God, in order to enable us to relate to God, Chumash describes God in human terms. Okay, how God did it, that's God's problem. We know that he did it. We don't know how he did it. Maybe a scientist can tell us finally how he did it. Chumash talks about why God did it, or what's it mean to man? What's the meaning of life now that there is life? And now that God gives me neshama, it's God gives, I'm alive, but we die, but God gives us life and gives us creative ability. What do we do with that creativity? I think that's, I study Chumash to find out what I need to do, not how God did it. How God did it, I don't know. But again, I think all those questions about historicity, what actually happened, and how God actually did it, I don't think that's the topic of Chumash. Okay, and on Shabbat we should reflect. In other words, that's a Shabbat's time of reflection of looking back what we did and looking forward, evaluating last week and looking forward. Now, is the goal of the week to get to Shabbat, or is the goal of Shabbat to make the week meaningful? That you can have a discussion on Shabbat about, or before Shabbat. Okay. 7 is also the largest primary number, that's for sure. Or under 10, that's true. There's why God picked 7, because every other day would be logical. Like 7 is the first number. That's just the primary number. There's logic to 1 and 2 and 3 to be like that, and 4, like they're all natural. The 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, they're all like, we have 5 fingers, and 4, the 4 sides, the 4, like 4 is a nice even number. Everything in 6 is like a cube kind of stuff. 7 is the first number that there's nothing special. There's no natural phenomena to go 7, except I think it may be the colors of the rainbow, which might explain why maybe the symbolism of the rainbow covenant. But 7 is totally unnatural, and I think that's why we use it as the number. But again, God picked 7, and that's what makes it special, because God picked it. But 7 is going to relate to nature because it's not natural. Okay, physical nature is defined by number 7. Space domain is 3-dimensional, but you can go backwards and forwards. Okay. Okay. So that 6 that we were saying about the different things, Ebenezer has a whole big thing on it, if I'm not mistaken. I think in Bereshit, of why 7 reflects nature with the 6 sides. Ebenezer has a whole thing on numbers that goes very similar to what Asher was talking about there in his post. Okay. And okay. Anyway, so again, we're over time for a change. So we'll stop here. But Taya was breaking the ice on the number 7. That's why we needed to share on creation to get that started. And then how this, again, I'm using it to explain Shabbat and Shemitah, but we just broke the ice on the number 7 today. There's something going on there. The main thing is whether my interpretation is correct. You can argue, but from an objective point of view, the story of creation is building up something. The number 7 relates to nature, and everything has to do with nature later on is going to relate to 7. So I gave it my own take on why all the malachot of Shabbat, how the rabbis understand Shabbat. But the idea of Tzelem Elokim has to be something really key and basic. Okay, I guess we'll stop here, Rabbi.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. Look forward to next week. Okay, this week, in addition to our regular shiur, we have 2 new series starting tomorrow. Rabbi Dr. Lindsay Taylor Guhartz will begin her 7-part series on Lost in Translation, the history of translations of Tanakh from London, England. And that'll be tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. from London, 6 p.m. in Israel. And Wednesday evening, 8 p.m., Dr. Moshe Sokolov, he, of course, did all last year, Wednesday at 8 on the Haftarot. We'll be giving a series, Rabbi, for you, how Tanakh was put together.
That'd be fun. Okay.
So that's starting this Wednesday night. Dr. Sokolov has written a number of books on this sort of general topic, and so that will begin this Wednesday. Our regular shiurim, of course, a week tomorrow night. Mark Shapiro continuing great rabbinic thinkers on Shaul Lieberman. Part 8, I believe, is tomorrow, but each class is a little bit independent. Of course, you can listen to the about 250 ones he's done up to now on various people. Tuesday, Rachel Danzig Sharansky on relationships in Genesis. Wednesday, Bivrit. Rav Yosef Carmel from Kolel Eretz Chemda will be giving part 2 at 1:15 Eastern, 8:15 in Israel on David HaMelech Kemiyaseitza Medina Atzma'it Harishona, and it's sort of the hashlachot for today. And then Thursday, Shuli Mishkin, as we mentioned, is not giving her shir this week because her son is getting married, Rabbi Leibtag. I'm sure you know that. The Mishkins are making a wedding next week, so Shuli will miss this Thursday's class, and of course we'll just postpone continue the series an extra week. Thursday night from Sydney, Australia, should I say from Friday morning, here 8:30 p.m. on the East Coast, but 10:30 a.m. in Sydney, Australia. Rabbi David Blackman will be giving the Parshat Shavua shir, and Friday morning 9:30 a.m. Eastern time I'll be giving this shir on a close look at the Siddur. So that's enough to keep you busy all week. Like I say, your job is to invite one friend to come to at least one class and try it out. That's why we let you come for free on condition that you invite a friend to come and join for free too. You know the old joke, you send a Jew, it's thank you, sends 10 other, you know that joke, Rabbi, right? With the barber? Yeah, everybody knows that joke, right?
I guess so. I have to
No,
remember.
I don't know.
the barber, the priest comes to get a haircut, and the barber said, I don't charge men of the clergy. And so the next day, the priest sends him a bottle of wine. And then an imam comes, and the barber, oh, no, I won't charge people of the clergy. So the next day, he sends him whatever, gift flowers. And the rabbi comes and the next day, there are 15 other rabbis at the barber. So that's right. So that's what I do. I make it for free. You invite 15 other, they don't be rabbis. They can be whatever they want, other people to come and join. So that's okay, everybody. Have a wonderful day. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow, other times during the weekend. Okay, Shavua Tov. Be well, everybody. Thank you very much. And thank you, Rabbi. We'll see you next week.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, very good. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope I tell jokes okay, that's you have to know how to tell the joke, how the punchline goes, but okay. Anyway.
It's okay.
All right.
Are you going to post the source sheets on?
Yes,
the
already. Oh yeah,
yeah.
Rabbi, there's some complaining, like how come we'll have to talk.
I always post them afterward. I'm afraid if I post them before and people look ahead and then I can't.
Yeah, I know that, but sometimes people post the link in the chat.
Right. No. So we made a mistake. I got up the source sheet at just before the class, and then Rabbi Leibtag said, put it up. No, put it up after the class. So if people.
Oh yeah, last time I sent the link. Yeah, I can send you the link right now if you want, but I can't share. That's okay. So it'll be on the website. It'll be fine.
Yeah, one of them is on the web. Yeah, the one with all your information is on the website. Not the psukim didn't make it, but I'll have that put up.
The PDF thing, yeah, that's just
the question is, so maybe in the future, that's what the rabbi prefers. Like I say, if there's a revolt and people demand that it goes up before, then we can talk to the rabbi and ask him if he'll allow us to post it in advance. But right now,
I like it better that I have it. It's a review sheet after this year instead of during this year.
Right. It's okay to post it after it, but it helps if you post it after in the chat. So then we.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay.
So
in the chat now. So Rabbi, you can post it in the chat now.
When I share file, no, I have to save it.
You know what? I have to do it from my website. Hold on a second. But I don't have the whole thing. I have. Okay, give me 1 second. Hopefully within 20 seconds, I can have it up. Yeah, no, I'm going to put it up in 20 seconds. I just need whatever for the pages to open. Sometimes it takes, a few seconds. Here we go. Just the last page, October 17th short sheet. Okay, here it's coming up. Okay, just let me copy and paste, and it will be up right now. And make sure my email goes to everyone in meeting. And here you go. Okay, there it is.
Okay, thank you.
It doesn't have the psukim part though. That I didn't realize only one of the sources went up. Like it's got what he said. So the psukim part will, when it goes up, it'll be on the website. I'm sorry as you just heard, Rabbi Leibtag sent the sources an hour before.
It's a different PDF file because it's landscape instead of portrait. So it can't be on the same. It's got to be a separate file.
Yeah. Okay.
I guess you can put the two PDFs together if you have. I'll figure out how to do that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.
I hope you know the joke about telling jokes.
Uh-oh. No.
Comedians Convention. You don't know that?
I don't know.
A new stand-up comic, just starting out in the business, and he meets a veteran comic who invites him to the annual comedians convention. So he comes with him and they sit down, and the room is a big auditorium filled with 100 comics, right? And all of a sudden, one of them stands up and shouts out, 39.
Oh, yeah,
Everybody
yeah, yeah.
breaks into
I know the
laughter,
joke. Yeah.
right?
Okay.
You know the joke.
Yeah. But you can continue, right?
So another guy.
I heard it was in
stands up.
jail. The way I heard it was in jail. The inmates used to yell out, they told the joke so often, they were so bored. So they go 52 and everybody would laugh. And a new inmate comes in. And so he yells out 43 and nobody laughs. So they say, why not? I said, you have to know how to tell a joke.
Right, exactly.
But anyways, okay, Rabbi, enough joking. I got work to do. Got to get, as Rabbi said, seriously. We got to literally and seriously. Okay. So thanks everybody. Okay. Have a wonderful day. Okay.